Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and activity without end, but with no volition, is me before every deadline I've ever had. Writers know what I'm talking about. I'm joined on this episode once again by William Leisner. William is the author of Trek novels The Shocks of Adversity, Losing the Peace, and A Less Perfect Union, and he's a 3-time winner of the Strange New Worlds writing competition. Bill, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back aboard. Today we'll be talking about Spock's Brain, the first episode of the 3rd season of Star Trek, the original series. Mel Brooks is held to have once said, "Sex is like pizza. Even when it's bad, it's still pretty good." And perhaps that axiom holds true for episodes of Star Trek. There are many episodes of the various series of Trek that have been held out as the, quote, worst ever, end quote. But no matter how reviled they are, you will unfailingly find some corner of the fandom that appreciates them for what they are, an earnest attempt to entertain and educate in a future that we can all aspire to. And there's room for all tastes in the world of Star Trek. Except Lazarus. Screw that guy. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. But first, Bill, it's great to have you back on the show. It's actually been a little while since you've been on a proper episode of the podcast. You were on our...
It has been, yes.
Yeah, you were on our Wrath of Khan live show a few years back, and we've had you on Discoverage to talk about Discovery and Picard.
Right. Weeks ago, we got to chat about Picard.
Yes. Speaking of Picard, we talked about this a little bit when you were on Discoverage, but what do you think of the new Picard series so far?
I mean, I'm generally liking it so far. There are a lot of questions that are being raised, and a lot of choices that I'm seeing made. It's like, okay, and I will trust you. I'm still willing to follow the writers and see where they're leading with all this. But
yeah.
I mean, it's certainly. I mean, I am enjoying it, and Patrick Stewart is back as Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah,
so,
I know. that's the big, that's the selling point right there. Yeah.
What more can you ask? You could ask for more, but, not much more.
Right. It would be selfish to ask for any more.
Yeah.
I saw an interview with Michael Chabon recently where he was answering all your questions about Picard. And one question that was asked of him, and he's not in charge of the whole enchilada, but they asked him if we would see more episodic Trek in the future. And he said if there is a hunger for it and the stories lead there, we'll see it. And I would say I think there is a hunger for it. I see people online all the time asking for the kind of Trek we remember, not the sort of disingenuous fan who just complains that this isn't his Star Trek, but we've had 2 series now that are very serialized in the fashion of modern TV shows. But I think a lot of us miss the kind of episodic, self-contained stories like the one we're going to talk about today. And his opinion was, if there's a want for that, we'll see it. And so what I want to know is, how do we communicate the want to him? Because I believe the want is there.
Well, I mean, like you said, there are plenty of people who are saying, quite vocally, a little bit more like the original series in TNG, a little more episodic.
Yeah.
And the fact that they are now coming up with series after series.
Yeah.
You got the Section 31, you got the Lower Decks, you've got, the other, a couple of other untitled ones that they've, just been hinting at.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure that, at some point in time, there might be a move towards the more episodic episodes, or more of a melding of the episodic versus the serialized.
Yeah, and we've already seen that in Discovery at some points. But TV is just so different today than it was when Trek launched. Yeah, we live in a strange time. I know you're a fan of the Twilight Zone as well as Star Trek. And over on CBS All Access, we've got a revived Trek franchise as well as a new Twilight Zone series happening. We've got Mission Impossible at the multiplex. I mean, I'm expecting any minute for them to announce a new Mannix series and maybe a Dark Mayberry RFD reboot.
Well, that would be great. That would be great. Gomer Pyle as a hardened Marine veteran, and everything old is new again.
I guess it has to be.
Comes around, and
yeah.
And I mean, I would not be terribly surprised that a Mannix reboot.
Yeah, you could totally do that. And of course, they've got Riverdale. I think that you could definitely take a sort of more mature stab at a Mayberry type show. I was thinking about the Outer Limits recently too, which they've brought back a few times. And as an anthology show like Twilight Zone, it's totally self-contained. And accepting the success of Black Mirror recently, which has been a phenomenon, I'm not sure that you can really pull off a gotcha anthology series the way you could in, say, the 60s or the 80s. I think audiences have become so smart and so hard to shock that How to Cook for 40 Humans or whatever your twist is not going to land the way that it used to.
No, I agree. The audiences are a lot more sophisticated, and they've seen a whole lot more than what we had 50 years ago. So it'd be a real challenge to pull that off with any kind of regularity.
I have to wonder if old Rod Serling was around today and wanted to make a TV show, like if he would try to do a Twilight Zone or a Night Gallery type thing, or if he would have to adapt with the times and what that would look like.
I think Rod Serling would have a lot of fun with a long serialized show.
Oh, really?
Going back to his golden age teleplay roots, where they would do the and such. I could see him wanting to do like a longer 4-hour type of story with broken up into half-hour pieces.
That could be good. Of course, the fourth season of Twilight Zone, where they went to hour-long shows, I think it generally is held to be not as strong as when they were doing half hours. Yeah.
Right. So it wouldn't necessarily be a Twilight Zone thing.
Yeah. Right. Well, I would definitely like to see that, but unfortunately, with the technology we have now, we can't have that. Star Trek Publishing is ramping up again as well in support of the new CBS properties. And so far the books are mainly ancillary stories to the new shows, but I'm wondering if they'll eventually go far afield in terms of storytelling and departing from the on-screen characters and storylines we see, like the Pocketbooks line.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I mean, just 2 years old or 2 seasons old at this point in time.
Right.
I have absolutely no doubt that at some point in time they will do other types of, taking a character focus and going off in some interesting direction that the television show wouldn't be the right format.
If you had a chance to write a tie-in for a new series, what ship or character or era specifically would you want to work on?
That's a good question. My heart would be doing something with Picard in the time between TNG and the Picard series.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure that would be the place that everybody would go first.
Well, yeah. And there's a lot of time to fill in, too, in between TNG and Picard, yeah.
It would be fun to do like a Giorgio and Saru on the Senshou.
Senshou, yeah.
Just do a one-off adventure with them.
Yeah, I hope somebody picks up the torch of the Klingon intrigue of the Discovery era. Because Klingon stories and Klingon political stories are always interesting, and then having this character like L'Rell, who is so different than a normal chancellor, and the kind of pressures and foes that she's making in that sphere, I think that could be really neat too.
And it doesn't seem like Discovery is likely to revisit that, being centuries into the future now. So There's no way to really get back. So that'd be certainly fertile ground for the tie-in series, for tie-ins. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to that hypothetical thing becoming real.
Yeah.
Why did you choose this specific episode, Spock's Brain, to discuss today?
Just because I thought it would be fun. It's of course the regularly described as the worst episode of Star Trek. I'm sure something that we will go back and forth about. But it's like that internet meme. If you can't take me at my Spock's brain, you don't deserve me at my city on edges forever.
Right.
You gotta take the whole thing. You gotta take the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
And appreciate what there is as best you can.
Yeah. We've talked about the third season of Star Trek on the podcast previously, but it was only like good episodes. Like we talked about the Enterprise incident, so I'm interested today to sort of dig into just the third season as a whole and how, like you said, there's good and there's bad. And of course, we'll talk about some of the stresses and the problems that the production was dealing with in the third season. And yet they still managed to turn out some episodes that are, all-time classics.
Yes. I mean, in spite of all the problems that they did have in that third season, some of the episodes just rise up to the occasion and really still do stand up.
Yeah. It's just, I'd love to, boy, I don't want to do it because I've got too much on my plate already, but I'd love to listen to a podcast or something about television production in the 60s and 70s and the way that these people both kind of ground it out, but also just created such interesting things in this very strict formula, yet seeing the creativity there, shows like Bonanza and like a show like Gunsmoke, which was on for 20 years. You couldn't even have that anymore.
Oh, no, absolutely not. It was really fascinating the way that, and even though it was, only the three networks.
Yeah, that's true.
They put out, but they were doing like much longer seasons. Like 26 was, I think, the average season for a television show.
Yeah.
And, to just keep that up season after season was really a real accomplishment.
Yeah. And
a lot of them.
And staring down, the barrel of 26 episodes, you were just forced to you had to approach it from like, we've got to come up with a million stories. This isn't a Netflix series where we kind of have a movie idea that's maybe 2 hours of content and we need to stretch it into like 10 hours for this season of a Netflix show. We're just going to have to get the cards on the board. We got to come up with at least 26 stories to make this season of TV work. Like things just don't even happen like that anymore. That barely exists anywhere.
Nope. It's a lost art form.
Yes. And I would say, and I mean, I'm colored by nostalgia, but I would say it's for the worse. But what do I know? These kids and their vaping Cybertrons these days. Maybe they like these 10 season episodes.
Yeah, these damn kids, they don't know how good it was.
They have no idea. There was so much Bonanza.
Back in my day.
I loved The Rifleman. We're talking about the original series episode, Spock's Brain. It was the first episode of the third season. It first aired on September 20th, 1968, the premiere of the third season. It was written by Lee Cronin, a pseudonym for former TOS showrunner Gene Coon. Coon was contracted to Universal after leaving Star Trek in the second season. Technically not allowed to write for anyone else but Universal, so his nom de plume was used on 4 episodes of the third season: Spectre of the Gun, Spock's Brain, Wink of an Eye, and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. It was directed by Mark Daniels, who we've talked about time and time again on the show. He's one of the early Trek's most prolific directors. And this was actually the last episode that he directed for TOS, as he was unhappy with the budget cuts that faced the third season production. He did later write the animated series episode One of Our Planets is Missing, and he directed the pilot of Gene Roddenberry's Planet Earth. The star date for this episode is 5431.4, and your assignment, Bill, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Spock's Brain.
Aliens steal Spock's brain. Kirk goes to save it.
I think the challenge here is to make it 25 words, but yeah, 25 words or less.
Is to stretch out, because that's really all there is to it.
Yeah, the pain and the delight. Brain, what is brain, and that's about it. Yeah. Here are some interesting facts from our memory banks about this episode. The script for this episode went through a number of changes after Gene Coon's initial draft. Originally, Spock's brain was taken away. The titular brain was taken while the away team was exploring an asteroid. Also, the teacher device was a later addition. In the original draft, McCoy performed the reattachment procedure with his own medical skill and a little help from studying the planet's advanced surgical techniques. Also, the procedure wasn't exactly perfect, as some of Spock's nerve endings were crossed, causing him to do things like laugh instead of sneeze, a problem that Spock himself corrected through his own mental discipline. It was apparently series producer Bob Justman's idea that Spock himself be involved in directing the procedure by having his speech centers repaired early in the process. This is the only episode of the original series that contains a main character's name. That practice would accelerate with later iterations of Trek, giving Q 8 episodes containing his name in the title, as well as 3 for Data, 2 for Bashir, 1 for both Troy and Quark, and 1/2 apiece for Tuvok and Neelix, depending on how you view Tuvix. I would say that that's just Tuvix's name in the title, but not everyone agrees with me. There are a lot of shots of the front of the bridge in the early scenes of this episode, which we don't always get. It's also the first episode to feature a character walking in front of the main viewer, which was made possible by using rear projection instead of the usual matting process. And maybe that was a money-saving feature as the show's budgets were slashed for season 3. Another note on thriftiness, Fred Steiner's score for this episode would be reused in later season 3 episodes, namely The Tholian Web and The Day of the Dove. Footage of the iMorg's computer working were also reused shots from earlier episodes, Assignment Earth and the Paradise Syndrome. This is the only time we hear a log entry by Mr. Sulu on the series, and it's one of 5 times that Sulu takes command of the ship in Kirk's absence. And I should mention that former show guests Paula Block and Terry Erdman's book, Star Trek 101, names this as the series' worst episode, and the Spock's Brain Award was awarded to the worst episode of each series as voted on by fans. That was The Lorelei Signal for the animated series, Genesis for TNG, Prophet and Lace for DS9, Threshold for Voyager, and These Are the Voyages for Enterprise. And I'm going to say The Lorelei Signal, what? That's a pretty good episode.
It's not that bad.
I think it's a neat idea.
You had to pick something, I guess.
Yeah, well, this list is invalid then. I have to mention that Spock's brain gets an oblique shout-out in a song by 90s band Semisonic. The last verse of their song, Never You Mind, off their 1998 album Feeling Strangely Fine begins, switch on the box, Mr. Spock is on the table, Dr. McCoy is unable to connect his brain, sweatin' and strainin', well, it seemed so simple at the time. Now let's talk about the guest stars in this episode. There's really only one guest star of note. That's Marge Dusay, who plays the role of Kara. Dusay got her start in film with a small role in the 1967 Elvis Presley film Clambake. She went on to a long career in TV and film, appearing as a guest star in shows like Wild Wild West, Hogan's Heroes, and Family Affair. Her longest running role was on the CBS soap Guiding Light, where she played Alexandra Spaulding until the show was canceled in 2009, after which she retired from acting. And she recently passed away on January 28th, 2020.
Just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it was very recently, yeah. Let's talk about the episode itself. Like I said before, we've talked about the 3rd season, sometimes called the turd season of TOS on the show before. We've talked about its problems, but we've never talked about them through the lens of what some consider one of the worst, if not the worst, TOS episodes, Spock's Brain. And I guess I would immediately ask, is it really the worst?
It's way down there, yes.
Oh, no, it's not top 10. It's not top 25.
I mean, you can try to argue for the alternate factor or for you let that be your last battlefield.
I'd put And the Children Shall Lead in there.
And the Children Shall Lead is definitely a contender as well.
Melvin Belly, yeah.
But, you have this episode, which was the first episode of the 3rd season, right after the big letter writing campaign to save the show, to get it back onto the air. And here it comes. It's fall of the TV season. Here's the big premiere episode. And
Brain, what is brain? Yeah.
brain was... The show basically starts with 20 seconds of silence or of no dialogue.
Sure.
As they're just looking at the screen.
Yeah.
And they're walking around the bridge looking at the screen and looking at the councils.
Yeah, that's not great. This episode was 6th in production, and it was bumped up, of course, to take advantage of Spock Mania, just like Amok Time was. I think that was the 5th in production for season 2, and they bumped both of the episodes up to the premiere so people could get some more Spock. But that, in this case, was not a good choice.
No, I mean, Spock was in the title, and that was pretty much it for Spock in this episode.
I know. I wonder if, we've all heard that, like, Nimoy and Shatner had, like, clauses in their contracts that they had to have the same amount of lines or whatever. And I don't know if Shatner won a bet or what, but Spock just, maybe he's got the better end of the deal because they have maybe the same amount of lines, but he's not on screen for a lot of it. And then when he is, he's just sort of walking around and not saying or doing anything. It seems asymmetrical.
Yeah, it was an easy week for Leonard, that's for sure.
Yeah. Although Leonard Nimoy did say that during the shooting of the episode, he was embarrassed. He said, a feeling that overcame me many times during the final season of Star Trek. But it's easy to pile on in retrospect.
And who can blame him?
Yeah, surely people criticize the idea of taking his brain out, and it powering a computer as being ridiculous. But surely that's no stranger than putting Keiko's baby inside of Kira, or people evolving into salamanders. Or here's something that gets glossed over in Trek, but there is like crazy elective plastic surgery in their world. Like you can make a Klingon into a Romulan and vice versa. What do they do do they cut your forehead bones off and just put them in a jar until you come back?
That's a good question. I wonder if they have like little boxes of leftover parts that they're just swapping around and we'll put this aside. Oh wait, he's not coming back. Well, we'll just do we bury this with him if he didn't come to the mission?
Yeah. Like when you cut something away, do they just throw it in the medical waste? And then say you're a Romulan who has your ears bobbed down to human, and they use a flesh knitter or whatever on you. Does it grow based on your DNA? Does it grow back your ear the way it should be? It's just it's kind of squicky to think about. But apparently, taking somebody's brain out, that's too far.
It's not a bad science fiction idea, taking the brain.
Oh, yeah.
And, taking for, other purposes. I mean, what makes the episode ridiculous is he has this little shiny neckerchief over his head, and you can't, there's no telling, did they actually even cut open his skull, or is that just covering up like a and they don't shave his head, they don't do anything, they just have him laid out on the table, cloth over his head. Well, his brain is missing.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, if they had, of course in 1969 you couldn't have bloody bandages all over his head and
right. Yeah, we fixed that. We fixed that now on shows like Picard. We've definitely upped what we can show in terms of blood and guts.
Yes, much more blood and guts in Picard, but yeah, I mean that the idea could have worked.
Yeah, there is a lot. There's a phrase in writing hat on a hat when you've got a lot of sort of premises stacked on each other, and we've got a underground city that is controlled by a computer, but that computer is an organic brain. You've got a race of women who have no knowledge at all unless they're required to by their society, so they can use the teacher device and suddenly they can get temporary knowledge. But they're sort of in struggle with a race of primitive men who live on the planet's surface, who are also like caveman guys with like Prince Valiant haircuts. They had to have that. They had to have the fringe in front. And so there's a lot happening in this episode. I don't think that it's necessarily too much. There are definitely more complicated Star Trek episodes, but you got an episode like A Taste of Armageddon where we get it. It's like a future world. They're at war, but they have sort of made war into an accounting thing, and they might have like technology that's higher or lower than the Enterprise, but that's the problem we have to solve. But there's so many things going on here, and yet none of them are really explored. It's just a quest to the heart of this planet to get Spock's brain. And then once they get it, Spock even begins to sort of talk about, wow, this is a really fascinating idea. You've got these women down here, you've got these men up there. And we just, shut up, Spock. And the episode's over.
Yeah, they set this up with no idea of exploring it or why it happens or how they're related to each other.
Yeah.
why are the men on the surface? Why are the women down below?
Yeah, and it's one more civilization that Kirk has destroyed in the name of progress.
Yeah, you're going to ruin us. You'll get by.
He's gotten good at that in his career. Yeah. This episode was, like you said before, or we've been talking about how this episode is rated the lowest by many different outlets. It was rated the third worst episode of all the episodes of the original series, or actually all of the episodes of the pre-Discovery series in 2017 by Screen Rant. CBS News, I guess they're an expert on Trek now, I'm not sure when this is published, called it one of the worst of the original series. Fox News ranked Spock's Brain as the #1 worst episode of all Star Trek up to 2018. However, opinions aren't all bad, and some of them are kind of coming back around on it. In 2012, the AV Club called it one of the top 10 must-see episodes of the original series. In 2013, Wired Magazine called it one of the top 10 most underrated episodes. In 2016, Sci-Fi.com included the episode in a group of Star Trek episodes that were commonly disliked but deserved a second chance. And in 2017, the Den of Geek website ranked this episode as the second best worst Star Trek episode of the original series. Oh, and author and former show guest Keith DeCandido gave it a 4 out of 10 in his tour review series and said, essentially, come on, guys, it's not that bad.
I love Keith, but
I don't know, Keith.
4 is a little high, I think. It's terrible. There's no two ways around it. It's terrible. But there are parts in it where it's like, it's so terrible, it's interesting.
Sure.
There's some entertaining little bits to it. The very idea of Spock being controlled by a remote-controlled clicker.
Yeah.
That's a sight to see.
Yeah, remote control Spock. I love how he makes like a fishing reel sound when he walks, like slowly reeling a fishing reel. Yeah. And then, of course, there's a lot of functionality on that remote control. It's got the finger moving to press button flywheel that you can turn there. A lot of fine control.
That you can work while you are laying on the floor in exquisite agony.
Yeah, right. In the worst pain you've ever felt. Yeah,
you can't see where his finger is, but you can maneuver it.
You get a sense of it, though. Yeah, it never. I think, like you said, it never really goes full camp. Like it never goes as far as it should, and I think that's kind of the problem with. I mean, I guess you don't aim for an episode to be bad, but the bad episodes of Star Trek can't go full camp because that's kind of antithetical to Trek. I think what people are reacting to when they say it's so bad, and I think this is a compliment for Trek and its stated purpose, is that being camp is antithetical to Trek. Trek's purpose was to deliver serious adult sci-fi in the primetime hour, and it was supposed to contrast with Lost in Space or My Favorite Martian or whatever. And it does. It has throughout its existence, but there's an extremely faint line between pathos and parody, and some episodes cross that, but not in a self-aware way where they can just give you just a goofy, fun time for an hour.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder if they were trying to get as close to camp as they could. And, Gene Coon had also previously written a piece of the action and Bread and Circuses, which certainly have their lighter, jokey moments. And, when you give a show a name like Spock's Brain...
You're kind of laying it out there.
It kind of seems like if you're not going to camp, then what are you doing?
Right, why is this happening? Yeah, Gene Coon fought hard to bring comedy to Trek. Like you mentioned, he wrote a piece of the action, and he was an advocate of episodes like The Trouble with Tribbles. Because I think he knew that it couldn't always be this tense space space action show. And I think Roddenberry had little time for the comedy side of the franchise. You know, reportedly clashes over issues like that is one of the reasons that Coon quit. But even though I like Spock's brain in all its terribleness, I can kind of see Roddenberry's point about how, I don't know, maybe the premise of the show can't go there. Maybe this crosses too far into self-parody.
Yeah. It might have been a noble experiment, but didn't quite pan out. However, they might have really intended it.
Yeah,
and it's so hard to know what they really, what Gene Coon intended, and what ended up on the screen because of budget cuts and because of producers who didn't really know Star Trek as well as Gene and Dorothy Fontana and that.
I think about like episodes of other Star Trek shows that seem to be going for pure comedy, and I'm not sure they're all that successful either. You think about something like Menage a Troy, or DS9 had some episodes that were supposed to be funny and were pretty funny, but there's episodes like the one where Luxana comes to the station and her telepathy is affecting everybody, so they're all falling in love with each other, and it's just kind of forgettable.
A little comedy goes a long way in Star Trek.
That's true. That's a great point.
And when you try to go all out with, like some of the Ferengi episodes on Deep Space Nine,
but you had the Ferengi to kind of be that on the show. Yeah.
But you can still go too far. There's still your profit and links.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know if I would argue with that. Even like Move Along Home is sort of my threshold for DS9. I actually don't think that threshold is as bad as people say it is. And Move Along Home, it's not great either, but I can kind of see how they thought that it would make a good DS9 or a good Star Trek episode. Star Trek barely escaped cancellation in 1968, and maybe it didn't, because when it came back, it was not in a position where it was not in a position of success. The production had changed greatly. The budgets were slashed. They were at around $175,000 an episode, down from $190,000 in the first year, when it was already tough to make ends meet. Gene Coon had departed as showrunner and executive producer. Fred Freiberger, was now the showrunner, but a lot of people feel like he was not right for the role. Arthur Singer was like the story writer and like head writer, and a lot of people felt like he didn't understand the material. They were taking scripts from non-staff writers, not the full open submission of later Trek, but people who were not really on the staff. They lost Jerry Fitterman, the series-long cinematographer, after The Empath early in the third season. And the show's time slot didn't help either. Roddenberry had initially been promised a prime 7:30 p.m. Monday time slot, but that would have bumped the most highly rated series on the network, Laugh-In, out of their spot. And George Shalter, producer of Laugh-In, threatened to leave the network if they didn't keep that slot. So Trek ended up instead in the Friday 10 p.m. death slot, and there's no better way to tell a producer that you don't care about their show than to put them at 10 p.m. on Friday.
Right. And you can tell, I've read, once that happened, the cast and the crews knew that this was going to be the end, and they were basically at that point just kind of like, okay, let's just get through this final year and
right.
get on with our careers.
Tell their agent to start looking around for them, yeah. Roddenberry also threatened to leave if he didn't get his way, but of course he didn't, and he ultimately stayed on as an executive producer, but basically left the day-to-day running of the show at that point. He actually got a development deal at MGM, and I think he was working on a Tarzan adaptation for MGM, which is sort of this sort of Don Quixote-esque project that he had been working on for a long time. And he got his only feature film credit at MGM, 1971's Pretty Maids All in a Row, which is a terrible, terrible film. And if nothing else, was a great argument for not canceling Trek, just to keep that movie from existing.
I've never had the pleasure of seeing that. So.
Yeah, boy, it's hard to recommend, but I guess if you're a Roddenberry completionist, maybe you should. I was surprised to learn that the show, which was canceled in February 69, had the possibility of getting 2 more episodes tagged on to the end of the season, which of course they didn't. And one of them would have been directed by William Shatner.
Oh, not aware of that.
There was an episode or a treatment called The Joy Machine, which he would have directed. I was thinking about the 3rd season and the way that America itself had been changing just over the course of the last 3 years of that decade. And it must have been really hard for Trek to keep up. I mean, if you're trying to capture the zeitgeist, you're a show about basically American imperialism in space. And in the meantime, in the real world, the Democratic National Convention's on fire. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy are shot. Nixon's elected. Utopia in the real world must have seemed farther and farther away.
Yes, absolutely. And I think of that when I look at what's going on today, and it's like everything is always, there have always been bad times, and we've always found a way to get through them.
Although it's like, it kind of like characters on a TV show, when you get to that 5th or 6th season finale, it's like, oh, we're going to get out of this one. I don't know. And they always do, but I feel like we're running out of tricks from a societal perspective.
Yeah.
Well, Trek knew that those kind of stories would sell, and they put a lot of social commentary stories into the 3rd season. You've got the anti-war message of "Let that be your last battlefield." Also, an anti-racism message in that episode. Day of the Dove is very anti-war. You have a little bit of anti-discriminatory theater with the kiss between Kirk and Uhura in Plato's Stepchildren. Trek is still doing Trek, whether or not their budgets are slashed and the names on the chairs have been changed a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, they were doing some good episodes. I mean, they had a whole lot going against them, but they were still trying.
There are some of my favorite episodes are actually 3rd season episodes. I really like Enterprise Incident. All Our Yesterdays is a great episode. It's not great, but I like it. For the World is Hollow and I've Touched the Sky, I think is a really interesting episode. Of course, Day of the Dove. The Tholian Web is fun.
Yeah, there were some gems in the in the 3rd season, and like you said earlier, you wondered if Trek didn't end after 2 seasons, and if there hadn't been a 3rd season, that probably never would have gotten the syndication deals that it did in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it would have been forgotten and buried in Paramount's vaults for probably to this day, until CBS started going through old properties and going,
what can we put on CBS All Access?
Well, they did a Lost in Space reboot on Netflix, so maybe we can do something with this Star Trek thing.
Yeah, people would have, I think, had some demand for it in some fashion. The real mystery to me, or it's not a mystery, I guess. I guess I understand it's just the way that TV was back then. But as soon as the show went off, they sort of figured out or discovered that, oh my God, there's a huge fan base, and now there are conventions every year, and people love and miss it. But the way that the machine worked back then, they just didn't think, well, there's no way to like make money off of this. Like nowadays, they'd immediately turn around and go, oh, all right, new Netflix series. Well, they do what they're doing, a cartoon show, show for kids, show on this network, that network. But it just sort of laid fallow, even though so many people liked it. So I think even if there'd be less to like, but even if there's only 2 seasons, I think we'd still remember it. What if Trek had reached 4 seasons? What do you think would have happened? There's a sort of a unofficial rule, I think, in Trek that Star Trek shows really start to hit their stride, in the middle or late part of their 3rd season, and then the 4th season is they kind of take off. So if Trek had that opportunity like TNG or DS9, what do you think the 4th season might have been like?
That's a good question. That would, I think, rely a whole lot on, would that have maybe kept Dorothy Fontana in the fold? Would that have brought other people, who would that have brought into the fold? If David Gerald might have come on as a staffer, or
sure.
But that's interesting, yeah, because we would be talking about the 69 to 70 season,
right?
You'd be right after the moon landing, which would probably give a creative jolt to at least some people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that would, and then you would have, what would you have? You'd have 79 plus, so close to 100 episodes for your syndication package,
right?
Which would probably have pushed fandom even higher than it was in the 70s.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, it's hard to say how long the show could have run, given the fact that it was a visual effects heavy show, which at a time when that was very expensive to do.
Right. Yeah, usually just Mannix is just on the apartment set for this week, grilling somebody on your normal show.
And there's only so many times that you can just go to the rock planet with the fuchsia sky.
Yeah, orange sky or blue sky? What do you want this week? Or green sky? Ooh, green sky.
Yeah, but yeah, that'd be interesting. I think an interesting thought experiment.
It could have definitely, assuming that, well, who knows? I mean, it could have brought people like Coon and Fontana back to the production, or maybe people like Arthur Singer and Fred Freiberger would have kind of figured things out more. I would be interested to see. I wish I could run a computer simulation to see how Trek would have handled 69 to 70 or 70 to 71 or any of the tumultuous years of like the Nixon presidency, the Vietnam War, because as much as I think Trek has evolved into what it always wanted to be, but I don't think it started that way. I mentioned before that it was sort of American space imperialism, and I think Gene had a good soul, but it's so much of it is rooted in what we think of as that sort of pre-60s Americanism, and I wonder if it would have been able to navigate those waters, or if we would see Kirk giving like a pro-Vietnam metaphor in some episode, being like, you got to keep fighting, it doesn't matter. I wonder how it would have dealt with that. See, that's what people do these web series, and they put so much time and energy and just into them and make them so fascinating and creative. But I want to see somebody like take it in a different direction. Like give us the fourth season and just get a bunch of newspapers from the 1969 and just pretend that you're writing based on like what the current events are then.
That would be something.
That's what a holodeck's for. Give me a holodeck and a computer that can compute all that out.
The planet of Nixon.
The planet of Nixons. That's well, you got President Capone, and you get the planet of Nixons. Yeah. This episode has flaws. We've definitely talked about that. I think it's a real go-to for them. It's an interesting idea to have this separation, this sort of like Morlock and Eloi, but flipped. But of course, the women are all in go-go boots. It looks like a civilization of the Valley of the Dolls, and that's pretty typical, I think, for Trek at this time.
Right.
This episode has that quality that a lot of bad Star Trek and a lot of bad TV has, which is a lot of stalling, a lot of repeated dialogue. And Shatner is really drawing out some of these line readings. I mean, literally probably to make the runtime of the show.
Yes, this is Shatner at his Shatneriest.
Yes.
With the pauses and the emphasis.
Right.
Where's
his brain? We're going to get his brain. I say brain about 40 times. I did like that they managed to fit a classic Trek fight scene in for no real good reason, but they framed it as, we're going to use science, and then they beat the crap out of these guys. Science works every time, yeah.
classic Kirk Fu, fight sequence there, and he's, it's McCoy and Scotty against one, and Kirk all by himself against the other one.
Of course, yes.
With his flying kicks and his two-fisted chops.
Yeah, Shatner looks good in this episode. People always talk about like his fluctuating weight, but I thought he was he came in ready to play in the beginning of season 3. And his hair, his toupee is on full blast now. That's a given. But it's you can tell the late '60s is creeping in because they're a little shaggier now. They're not quite as brill creamed and clipped up as they were previously.
They are.
I was thinking about this as I was contemplating the episode, that you literally have a situation here that is like the vaunted Spock decision in Star Trek II, where he sacrifices himself because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. Yes. And Kara literally points out that the need of her people for the controller is greater than the need for the friend. And I guess maybe Spock doesn't fully get to make this decision because it's Kirk doing it, but they basically say, nah, we need that brain back.
Yeah, I caught that as well, and it was like Spock probably would have, if he was totally in control, would have gone, yeah, that's probably a better idea, and I can live 10,000 years like this. And
right. Yeah, he seemed to kind of like his situation. Yeah. He kind of liked being a brain in a job.
Yeah, he wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't, he didn't have anything to complain about.
Right.
He wasn't complaining about anything. I don't know where the hell I am, but
maybe that is, I suppose, as a brain you would still have your emotions to deal with, but without the lusts, or the stimuli of the body. Maybe the brain in the jar situation would be a perfect setup for a Vulcan.
Probably so.
Let's hope they don't think of doing that.
One of the interesting things is that, they needed this organic brain to run their city, but he's apparently only the C.
Mm.
He's only, he's breathing, he's purifying water.
Right.
But he's not actually, there's no description of him actually, okay, here's the function of the city, and I have to make sure that, this delivery gets to this factory, and
yeah,
you would almost think that he could, as the controller, control the bracelets all by himself without, Kirk and his magic remote control.
Yeah, we never get into how exactly the Morgs and Imorgs are going to keep their civilization going. I think it's implied that they're just going to have to abandon the facility underground and just live with the Morgs on the surface, which there's a lot of hardship coming for them since they're apparently have childlike intellects. I don't think they're going to be building shelters anytime soon.
Yeah, you get absolutely no idea, how are the Morgs living, surviving? Are they hunting? There's no wildlife that we see. Are they hunter-gatherers? Are they?
Yeah. They do. They're wearing furs straight from the costuming department, so presumably there's some kind of animal on the surface. But that's really an interesting, or that's really a more interesting conflict too. If they are in position to rescue Spock's brain, and Spock makes the point that it would be better for him to save all these people rather than to get one first officer back. And then the last part of the episode is them having to struggle with Spock to convince him to come back.
There are lots of ways, that this could have been rewritten.
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made.
Yeah.
I really wonder what the discussion was when it was like, okay, this is good enough.
Yeah.
This draft of the script is good enough. It's like, Gene Coon saying, no, that's just my outline.
Right, I wasn't done with that.
Give me a couple more weeks, and I can actually. No, don't bother. We'll just film it like it is.
Right. Yeah. It's not quite done, guys. But okay. Yeah. I can imagine tuning in as a fan and seeing that and thinking, maybe what's going on over on that other channel there? What are the boys doing on Bonanza? But if you stick with season 3, there are definitely some good ones. But then you reach the Lights of Zetar and you're like, okay, I quit. And the finale. I mean, oh boy, I think it's amazing that
Turnabout Intruder. Yeah,
it's incredible that Trek exists at all after Turnabout Intruder.
And yet it does.
It does, though.
50 years later.
That's right. Well, as we get to the end here, was there anything else that you wanted to say or point out, or any favorite moments from the episode you wanted to mention?
Oh, favorite moments. Well, we all know what our favorite moment is from this episode.
What's that?
Brain. What is brain?
Yes.
And, you really do have to hand it to Marge Doucet for actually delivering that with some kind of believability of this really just simple-minded person who is just overwhelmed by these aliens. And then she does do a very good switch once she's gotten the teacher, and she's and then she's turns into a very different character.
Right. Yeah, that was a good job by her. I had to call out. I don't know if they've ever done this on the show before, but Scotty's own little Scotty Foo move where he pretends to faint to distract somebody, and then
that was that was something that I had. And when I saw that in my most recent rewatch, it was like, are you blanking me? Are you crapping me?
It reminds me of, the way that the Vulcan nerve pinch came about, which was they just needed, a way to subdue this character. And Nimoy's like, well, I don't think I'd punch him. What if I did this? Okay, fine. Did they have a similar situation where Scotty's like, well, I don't think I would hit a girl. What if I just pretended to faint? And they're like, fine, whatever, fine. It's not going to go down with the Vulcan nerve pinch, I don't think.
And I think, and Kirk knew it was coming.
Oh, yeah, they've worked together for a long time, yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't see that scene where he's like, now, if anything goes wrong, you faint dead away. I'll be ready to go.
Just pass out like a little wilting flower.
Yes. Like you've had a little too much of the green stuff. I like the reaffirmation that no matter how desperate Kirk is and how much he wants the brain of his friend and first officer back, he still is a Starfleet officer. We get a lot of guns pointed at people, but he's, he makes a point of no one can kill a man. That's not what we're here for. That's not what we want. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really neat. I also like, D. Kelly, as always, is great in this episode. And the idea of going from, I could cure a rainy day, in Devil in the Dark, to him actually having the ability to possibly cure a rainy day and then losing it. And we've got a lot of great shots of D. Kelly's sweat upper lip in this episode. He's just trying to work this out. And having the conclusion be Spock helping him out with the procedure and chagrining him even more that's a really great. That's a Star Trek right there.
That is a classic McCoy Spock button to the scene.
Yeah.
I never should have reattached his vocal cords.
Trying to thread a needle with a sledgehammer. Yeah.
But I think I also want to point out that teacher prop was kind of cool. You have to admit, that was low budgets that they were going through. That was a nifty little prop.
I have to wonder if it began life as a hairdryer like they had in the old salons of yore, or if they just found the perfectly shaped piece of Perspex and they're like, all right, let's stick some knobs into this.
It looks like it probably came out of a beauty parlor. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is fitting for the Council of the Valley of Dolls. Yeah.
Right.
I also like, just the last thing I wanted to say, when they get in the fight with the cavemen have their primitive weapons and they're throwing rocks. And then one guy just throws his club at them end over end. It's like, who throws a club?
Yeah.
He had a spear or something, but they couldn't afford that. So he just took his papier-mâché club and just whipped it at Captain Kirk. Let's talk about Space Dads. I think the last time you were on the show, you said that Picard was your favorite captain. And I guess I'd have to ask how you think that Picard would have handled this situation.
Who?
Let's say Riker's brain. Oh, my God. I want to see that episode so bad. Riker's brain is taken away. What happens?
Well, it would have been Data's brain, probably.
Well, yeah.
But Riker's brain.
That's right. We've kind of had that episode, haven't we? In something like The Most Toys.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you kind of have had that. But let's, I think Picard would have spent more time trying to suss out the Morgan E-Morg.
Sure.
Boy, I can't, to even try to transpose this episode in 20 years further into the future of television sophistication is just like, can't quite wrap my mind around that.
It's funny because I know it's necessary for the plot of the most toys, but they basically just write Data off immediately. They're like, that's a sad end, and then we got a mission to do, and they just kind of continue their mission. But I'd have to, I think Picard would be much more interested in what's going on between the Morg and the iMorg and the conflict between them, and maybe we'd get a Darmok situation where he's spending a lot of time with Kara trying to really get through to her. So it isn't that we're just taking this away. I'm going to make you understand that we need this back, but perhaps we can provide you with something that will, replace it in its stead. Or maybe they'd avoid the whole thing because is this a General Order 1 situation?
Well, they initiated contact, so
yeah, they got that crazy ion drive. That's right.
Yeah, they have that crazy ion drive. You have to wonder why the controller would have set up a system where you have to go and jump into this ion drive thing every 10,000 years when there's actually, with no idea what's actually out there.
Right.
When right next door there are two other planets with sentient life forms.
That's true. Yeah. There's no Nobel genius on the 2030 planet. You just can't grab that guy's brain.
Yeah, go and grab Stephen Hawking from the other planet. And
sure. Yeah, or Da Vinci from the 1400s planet. There you go.
Oh, yeah. That would have worked, too.
Well, we've got that. I don't know what this controller's doing. We've got it figured out. Well, now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a promotion to the rank of Lieutenant Commander, thanks to your service on the first episode and, of course, the live episode from Convergence. Now, I think the department that you were working in was the costume department, and you are in a fairly high rank at this point. So as somebody who is in charge, nominally, of the costume department, what would those duties entail? You're beyond just a little bit of sewing, needle and thread now.
Oh, let's see. I think I will want to bring in some more consultants who will be able to suggest other things rather than the same fur coats from, the time tunnels caveman episode.
Right. I was looking at Spock's. They put Spock in that sort of mechanics coveralls, and knowing that they reuse things, I was trying to think of another episode where that had appeared, or someone who fit Leonard Nimoy's measurements, and I couldn't come up with anything.
Was Captain Christopher wearing something like that? No, he was in his flight suit and then he was in a uniform.
Yeah.
So
he did have something kind of similar in This Side of Paradise. Maybe it was the same thing. Whenever Spock is compromised, he wears the green canvas. Yeah.
So that's his casual wear.
Right, that's Spock's casual wear.
Vulcan, what's in Vulcan fashion?
Forget the robes. He wants something that won't stain. Yeah, and is tough. He works hard. He plays hard.
Well, the robes with the script is for special occasions, and then you just have the drab olive green jumpsuit.
Functional, not aesthetic. Functional.
Yeah. It's logical clothing.
Well, as the head of the costume department, I trust you.
Well, thank you.
Well, Commander Leisner, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
I can most easily be found on Twitter at @BLeisner.
All right, well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we're signing off until the next mission, hailing frequencies closed.
Hannah.
And I'm Caliban.
And we're the hosts of the Sailor Noob podcast. I'm the expert.
And I'm the noob.
You're talking into the wrong end of the microphone.
Aye, aye.
Okay. Every week we watch a new episode of Sailor Moon and learn about monsters, fashion, food, culture, and of course, the Sailor Warrior of Love and Justice, Sailor Moon.
All right, now, what is her rank? Is she an admiral or a rear admiral?
Okay, shh. The ad's almost over. We're a couple of magical people, and every week we Moon Prism Power make up a new episode.
Ready or not, ships? Steady as she goes.
Please stop that. Sailor Noob is available every Friday on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Shiver me timbers.